increasing, we should be plateauing, which we're almost there, and then decreasing in order to protect decent ceilings of temperature for most of humanity. But of course, there are abundant proof points of the fact that we're decarbonizing the economy, not at the scale and speed that we should, but we're definitely moving in the right direction.
That was Christiana Figueres, former UN climate chief, saying that we're moving in the right direction on combating global warming. But the UN now says it's virtually impossible to keep to the international target of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So, what is the realistic outcome of these talks? We're going to bring together Vishal Prasad, who is a climate activist from Fiji. He joins us live from Belém. And Rebecca Cairns-Wick, who's the Chief Minister for the island of St Helena, an island in the South Atlantic, about halfway between the coasts of Africa and South America, and part of the British overseas territories. Welcome both. And I'm going to start with you, Vishal. When the British Prime Minister says the consensus is gone on fighting climate change, do we lose hope? What can be achieved in Belém where you are?
Thanks, Paul. No, rightly said, it is a very difficult time that we're coming together for COP30. I mean, all of the warnings, all of the reports that have come out in the last month tell us that we're not in a good place on climate. And then when you factor in the bigger geopolitical scenario, there are even bigger concerns to worry about. But I think COP30 has the potential to really be a turning point. It's been labeled as the implementation COP, and we look as Pacific Island nations, as people from the Pacific coming into COP, we really are hoping for COP to deliver on that promise of implementation. For us as the Pacific Island students fighting climate change, we're coming into COP with an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice, a landmark ruling that said that countries have an obligation to protect the climate system. And this is a new tool that will for the first time be introduced at COP. And our hope is that it will help build ambition and accountability across the board, away from the old politics of climate that we've seen in the past.
Are you optimistic, Rebecca Cairns-Wick, Chief Minister for St Helena?
I think you always have to have hope. It would be all too easy to give up and say that things are not possible and it's not possible to get funding. But by working together, amplifying our voice, garnering strength from hands across the ocean in the case that we're working with on the GO program. We are united in our ambition, our island survival in terms of the ability to adapt and to respond and to cope with those impacts depends on it. So I think, we cannot give up hope, and we certainly gather strength from uniting as small island states and continuing to amplify our voices, because we are at the front line of climate change impacts, and they are affecting our survival.
There are all sorts of levels of frustration for you, surely, because you're presiding over an extremely biologically diverse place, desperately in need of protection. And yet Britain has to negotiate on your behalf, so you have limited influence. How do you combat that, for a start?
I think that's part of the partnerships arrangements and values that we share is making sure that we are communicating well with the UK government and having opportunities to do that. And certainly in the next couple of weeks I will be attending the Joint Ministerial Committee in London alongside other heads of island states to overseas territories to take those messages to the UK government. The UK government, and we are talking about opportunities for climate finance. And again, I think it's just being strong and united in that voice and showing also what we are doing, what we can do with the limited resources that we have got, and how we can benefit. Because being a UK overseas territory, being a recipient, eligible for overseas development assistance, means that we do not have the ability within our recurrent budget to adapt and be flexible to climate change on our own. We are highly dependent on having that climate finance from the UK and partnerships like the GO programme.
Vishal Prasad from Fiji, how do you react to people going backwards? The UK says it won't commit public money now to Brazil's flagship plan to protect the rainforests. European governments were doing pretty well on anti-climate change measures. Now that they're threatened by voters who think that isn't a priority and who won't pay for the change necessary, and targets are not being met for that reason. People are backing down, aren't they?
Yeah, there has been certainly a lot of discussion around this, and a lot of action from countries do point in the direction that we're slowly backsliding from our pledges and commitments that we've made. And really, it's very disheartening to see that, because at a moment when the world needs us to all to come together and face this challenge head on, we are slowly in the details, in the fine print, we're moving backwards from our pledges, from what we expected to do. And our expectation really coming into Belém is that we're able to kind of change the narrative away from this, and for people to really understand now that there is a legal obligation to act, and that backsliding or moving away and not doing your utmost does have legal consequences. And hopefully that can serve as the impetus for countries to come back on the table.
Would you spell it out? What happens to Fiji if these targets aren't met? Why is it in the brunt of change?
Well, for Pacific Island countries like Fiji and many others, the impacts of climate change for many communities is really existential. We have already seen sea level rise causing mass relocations of villages in the country. There have been about 40 communities identified in Fiji, many that have been relocated. So many more people risk losing their home, their lands, because of sea level rise. We've seen deadly cyclones hit one after the other. These were once in a decade storms, now hit countries in a matter of years and span like 72 hours, wiping away close to a third to a half of GDP of a country in a matter of hours. And so this is meant to get worse. We're at as temperatures rise, and we're currently on an average temperature rise of about 1.2 degrees of warming. And as we head to 1.5 or above is what the science tells us we're headed towards, the impacts of climate change are unfathomable for many countries, especially for those that risk losing whole nations like Tuvalu and Kiribati. And so really, we're here sounding the alarm that while we in the Pacific are facing the impacts of climate change now, this is not going to just be something that's going to remain exclusive to the Pacific. The whole world will be facing or is facing the impacts of climate change, and it is in our best interest to kind of get our act together as soon as possible.
Thank you, Vishal Prasad from Fiji, Rebecca Cairnswick, Chief Minister of St. Helena in the South Atlantic. Backsliding is happening, isn't it? And we're going to see some of it at this COP summit. Laurie.
Yeah, I mean, I think this has always been a really tricky thing to try to make progress, because, as Christiana Figueres was saying, it's it's a consensus system. And imagine trying to get consensus these days as multilateralism weakens around the world, and people kind of feel more emboldened by Trump and other things that are going on to break out of the way that things have been done. But I mean, she's right as well that we have made a lot of progress on these, these meetings, which are often ridiculed as a lot of rich people flying in to talk about saving the climate. They have made real progress. They have helped get renewables on an incredible path. I mean, despite having huge subsidies for fossil fuels around the world that are, acting as a big brake on that transition. But I think we tend to talk about the COP as, it's involved in these very fine negotiations around things. We're supposed to create, for instance, 100 markers to understand how adaptation is succeeding or failing at this COP. But the real story about COP is this much broader one of standing back and saying, people say it's too expensive to do this. There are other priorities. The reality is it's too expensive to not do this. It's just that the money is a little bit in the future, which makes it so politically difficult, because if we act on climate change, we're going to end up in this world where food is more affordable, where your power bills are much lower. The kind of things that people worry about every day are going to become much easier. You'll continue to be able to afford insurance for your house. You won't have these storms that are coming, and droughts and floods and wildfires that are destroying so many
That's a big
things.
promise. I thought we'd already passed that point of no return, according to some.
No, we're going to pass this 1.5 degree goal already. We may be past that at this point. So we will have to deal with those impacts, but it's a difference between a world that is about 1.5 or a little higher, where we have impacts that are really damaging that we're going to have to deal with, and one where we're headed to at least 2.8 degrees of heating right now on the current plans around the world. That is a world where we can't grow food adequately to feed people. That is a world where all the development indicators start moving backwards in a very serious way, where we're going to live in this world that is not one we want to be in.
And Tim, how damaging is it to the movement that President Trump says he thinks global warming is a con job, or does it galvanize certain countries to do more?